In the town of Wyndham, tucked between the railroad tracks and the long stretch of highway that no longer led anywhere important, there stood a row of elm trees that had watched over generations of lives. People used to say that if you walked down Maple Street at sunset, you could hear the hum of 1,000 quiet yesterdays. It was a place where time moved politely, where windows stayed open on summer evenings, and where neighbors still waved even when they had nothing to say. At the corner of that street lived Mr. Samuel Green, a widower who had once taught arithmetic at the local high school. His house, painted pale blue and softened by years of sun, was surrounded by a small garden that leaned toward neglect but never quite surrendered to it. Samuel was 78, thin as a broom handle, with hands that still remembered the weight of chalk and the patience of teaching. Every Sunday morning he swept the porch, poured himself a cup of coffee, and watched the world stir itself awake. He had been alone for 15 years, ever since his wife Edith had fallen ill one winter and slipped quietly from this world, leaving behind the faint scent of lilacs and the half-finished quilt she had been stitching by the window. After she was gone, Samuel found it impossible to move her sewing basket. It stayed there by the chair, the needle still threaded, the fabric faded to the color of old dreams. Sometimes, when the wind came through the window, it would stir the edge of the cloth, and he would imagine that Edith was simply in the next room, humming the tune she had always hummed when she worked. The neighbors checked on him from time to time. Mrs. Penny from across the street brought him apple pies in autumn and rhubarb crumble in spring. The postman, a cheerful man named Harold, often lingered for a moment longer than necessary, pretending to admire the roses, just so Samuel would not feel the silence pressing too hard. But Samuel was content in his solitude. He had his books, his garden, and his memories, and those were companions enough. Every Sunday after church, children would pass by his house on their way to the ice cream parlor. He would watch them from the porch, the sound of their laughter tugging at the corners of his heart. Sometimes he would close his eyes and remember the years when he had taught boys like those, their hair slicked back, their notebooks filled with careless doodles, their minds too eager for the world to sit still and learn about fractions. He had loved teaching, not for the arithmetic, but for the moments when understanding lit up a child's face like sunrise breaking through fog. It was on one of those warm Sundays in late July that Samuel received a letter. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but familiar, the sort of script that belonged to another era. He opened it carefully, the paper crackling beneath his fingers, and found that it was from an old student of his, Thomas Whitaker. Thomas had been one of his brightest pupils, though never the easiest. He had sat in the back row, restless and clever, dreaming of places far from Wyndham. The letter was brief. Thomas wrote that he was returning to town after 40 years away, and that he hoped to visit his old teacher before the summer was out. The letter stirred something in Samuel that he could not name. He thought of the countless faces that had passed through his classroom, the lives that had scattered to the winds, and wondered what had become of them all. He folded the letter neatly and set it on the mantel beside the framed photograph of his wedding day. Edith smiled from the picture, her eyes bright with the confidence of youth. The days that followed were gentle, slow, and full of the kind of anticipation that made even the smallest details feel luminous. Samuel trimmed the hedges, dusted the sitting room, and polished the old oak table that had not been used in years. He even brought down a second teacup from the shelf, washing it carefully, though he told himself it was only to be polite. When Thomas arrived a week later, the afternoon sun was spilling gold over the porch. He was no longer the wiry boy Samuel remembered, but a man of gray temples and softened features, dressed neatly in a suit that seemed too warm for the weather. They shook hands, and though no words were exchanged about the long distance between their years, a quiet understanding passed between them. Samuel poured tea and they sat together, watching the light fade through the elm trees. Thomas spoke of the world beyond Wyndham, of cities and offices, and the slow trade of ambition for comfort. He had married once, he said, but time had a way of making companions out of ghosts. Samuel listened, nodding, his mind wandering between memory and the present moment. The afternoon stretched softly into evening, and when Thomas left, he promised to return the following Sunday. That night, Samuel found himself unable to sleep. The house seemed too still, too aware of its own silence. He rose from bed and walked through the rooms, touching the back of Edith's chair, the frame of the door where she had marked the height of their niece, the cold handle of the kettle she had once whistled over. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender. In the living room, he stopped before the lamp by the window and turned it on. The light pooled gently across the street, and for a brief moment he thought he saw Edith's reflection smiling back at him from the glass. In the weeks that followed, Thomas came often. Each visit added a little more life to the house. They talked of old classmates, of town fairs, of summer storms that had once flooded the streets. Sometimes they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, content in the simple presence of another heartbeat nearby. For Samuel, it was as if the years had folded in on themselves, returning him to the quiet joy of companionship. For Thomas, it was a reminder that not all connections fade. Some wait patiently in the corners of memory until they are called again. Autumn arrived with its slow decline of color, and the elm leaves turned the shade of tarnished brass. The mornings were crisp, the evenings long. Samuel began to tire more easily. One Sunday, when Thomas arrived, he found his old teacher sitting on the porch, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. The teacups were ready, the kettle still warm. Thomas sat beside him and spoke softly of the harvest, of the coming winter, though Samuel did not stir. The sun set quietly, and by the time the church bell rang in the distance, the house had fallen completely still. When the neighbors saw the unlit lamp that night, they knew. The next morning, the town gathered in hushed reverence, and Thomas arranged everything with a care that came from gratitude more than obligation. The service was small, the kind Samuel would have liked. Someone placed Edith's unfinished quilt over the coffin, and someone else read aloud the words from one of his old report cards. He taught with patience and believed every mind could shine. In the weeks that followed, Thomas continued to visit the house. He watered the garden, kept the porch swept, and each Sunday evening he lit the lamp in the window. The light, soft and steady, spilled across Maple Street, glowing through the mist. People passing by would see it and smile, thinking of the old teacher who had never stopped believing in small kindnesses and quiet truths. Wyndham went on changing, as towns do. But the house remained. The lamp burned faithfully through every season, a reminder that even the simplest lives could leave behind something enduring. And on still evenings, when the air was heavy with the scent of rain and cut grass, some swore they could hear the faint sound of chalk against a blackboard, or the soft hum of a woman stitching in the next room. The light stayed on long after everyone who remembered its story had gone. It became part of the town's rhythm, a constant heartbeat beneath the turning years. And though no one could say exactly why it mattered, everyone agreed that Maple Street felt less lonely because of it. After Samuel Green's passing, the house at the corner of Maple Street did not stand empty for long. Thomas Whitaker kept his promise, though no one had ever asked it of him. He had no family of his own, no children to write letters to, and no one waiting for him in any other town. So he stayed. The blue house, with its worn porch and tilting garden gate, became his sanctuary. The neighbors said it seemed right, as though the house had chosen him. He came to know its sounds, the creak of the floorboards that spoke of age, the sigh of the window when the evening wind passed through, the gentle rhythm of the old clock that had marked every lesson Samuel ever taught. On the first Sunday after the funeral, Thomas lit the lamp in the window again. Its warm light spilled softly into the street, and those who saw it from afar felt a kind of peace settle in their hearts. Some said it was like the town breathing again. Over time, Thomas learned the quiet routines that Samuel had kept for decades. He swept the porch every morning, pruned the roses when the weather allowed, and read in the evenings by the fire until his eyes grew tired. The house seemed to approve of these small acts of care, and in return it gave him a sense of stillness that he had never known in all his years away. Sometimes he would imagine that Samuel was there beside him, nodding at the order of things, or that Edith's unseen presence lingered in the scent of lilacs that still drifted faintly through the air in spring. The neighbors took comfort in Thomas's presence. The children who passed by on their way to school would wave at him, and he would raise his hand in return, his heart softening each time he saw the reflection of his own boyhood in their eager faces. The postman, a new one now, would leave letters and pause for a brief chat about the weather. The world outside was changing, radios giving way to televisions, cars becoming sleeker, and houses sprouting up in the fields where wildflowers once grew. But Maple Street kept its gentle rhythm. Years folded into one another quietly, as they do when no one is watching. Thomas's hair turned white, his steps slower, his reflection a stranger he came to accept without question. The seasons circled faithfully, and the lamp continued to burn in the window each evening. People began calling him the lamp keeper, though he never thought of himself as such. He simply lit the lamp because it felt wrong not to. It had become his way of saying goodnight to the world. One winter, the snow came early and heavy, blanketing the street in a hush that made every sound seem distant. Thomas would sit by the fire with a blanket over his knees, the light from the window cutting through the frost like a small promise. Sometimes he would read Samuel's old schoolbooks, still stacked neatly on the shelf, the margins filled with faint pencil notes and tidy figures. The scent of dust and time clung to them. Once he found a pressed violet between the pages, long dead but still holding the ghost of color. He placed it gently in a jar on the mantel, and felt that he had somehow uncovered a secret kindness from the past. It was during that same winter that Thomas fell ill. It began as a cough, then a fever, then a fatigue that no amount of rest could shake. Still, he lit the lamp each night. The neighbors noticed it burning later and later, as if the flame refused to give in to the cold. One evening, Mrs. Penny from across the street found him sitting in his chair by the window, the lamplight warm upon his face. He was breathing softly, his expression peaceful, as though he had simply drifted into a gentle dream. The lamp flickered once, then steadied, as if acknowledging his departure. After the funeral, the house was once again left empty, and the question arose as to what would become of it. But fate, as it often does, had already made quiet arrangements. Among Thomas's few belongings, the townspeople found a letter addressed to the Wyndham Historical Society. In it, he expressed his wish that the house be kept as it was, a place of memory and peace for anyone who wished to sit in silence for a while. He asked only that the lamp in the window never be allowed to go dark. The town agreed. Volunteers came to clean and restore the old rooms, though they left everything much as it had been. The books on the shelf, the teacups on the table, the unfinished quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. They replaced the oil lamp with an electric one, small and steady, its glow no less kind than before. Every evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, someone from the town would stop by to switch it on. It became a ritual that no one spoke of, but everyone understood. Years later, school children would walk past and point to the house, whispering the story of the lamp keeper and his teacher, of the light that never went out, of how it had once guided travelers through fog and storm. Some of the older townsfolk would smile and nod, remembering their own youth, their own teachers, their own quiet nights spent watching that same glow from afar. As decades passed, Wyndham changed. The railway line closed, the shops moved to the new highway, and many of the old houses were sold to strangers. Yet the blue house remained untouched, standing like a sentinel of gentler times. The lamp continued to shine, its light rippling faintly across the curtains. No one knew exactly when the tradition began to mean more than habit. Perhaps it was after one of the town's sons failed to return from the war, and his mother, walking home in grief, saw the lamp and took it as a sign that love endures. Perhaps it was during the hard winters when the elderly found comfort in the thought that somewhere in town, a light was always waiting. Or perhaps it was simply that people, even in a world that hurried forward, still needed something to remind them of grace. Eventually, the town's younger generation took over the duty of keeping the light. A local girl named Anna, who worked at the library, made it her own quiet mission. Each evening, just before dusk, she would walk down Maple Street with a small key in her pocket, unlock the door, and step inside the house. She would take a moment to breathe in the scent of wood and age, listen to the faint ticking of the old clock, and then turn on the lamp. Sometimes she would sit in the armchair for a while, watching the dust turn golden in the light. The world outside would blur into silence, and she would feel, though she could never explain why, that she was keeping company with those who had come before her. The lamp continued to burn long after Anna grew old herself. It became the town's most constant thing, outlasting fashions, machines, and even memories. Travelers passing through Wyndham at night would often pause to look at the house, wondering who lived there, never guessing that it had been empty for 100 years. The townsfolk liked it that way. To them, it was not an empty house but a presence, a quiet reminder that kindness, once kindled, need never be extinguished. And so, the light in the window went on shining, through storms, through wars, through the restless turn of time, on still nights when the air was thick with the hum of crickets and the scent of summer rain. Those who stood beneath the elm trees sometimes thought they could see two figures in the window, a man with a gentle face, and beside him another with white hair and soft eyes, both looking out upon the street they had loved. The lamp between them glowed steadily, and the town of Wyndham, small and steadfast, slept in its warmth. The years softened Wyndham like water smooths a stone. Seasons passed with their quiet rituals, snow on the rooftops, lilacs in spring, gold leaves brushing against the pavement come autumn, and through them all, the lamp in the window of the blue house continued to glow. It had become less of a tradition and more of a heartbeat. Those who had grown up seeing it each evening could not imagine the town without it. For the children of Wyndham it was the sun that never set. Anna grew old with that lamp. What had begun as a small act of care in her youth became the rhythm around which her days turned. She worked at the library until her hair turned silver, and even after she retired she would still walk to Maple Street at dusk. Her steps grew slower, but her devotion did not waver. She had outlived her friends, her parents, and almost every face she had known in her youth. The town was quieter now, more transient, but the lamp still shone. In her later years, Anna moved into a small cottage on the edge of town. It had a single window facing Maple Street, so that even on the days she could no longer walk the distance, she could still see the faint glow in the distance. The house itself had changed hands many times in paperwork, but never in spirit. The townspeople treated it as a place beyond ownership, part museum, part shrine, but mostly memory. Each generation learned the story differently. Some said the lamp was kept for a teacher who had once inspired the town's children. Others believed it burned for a widow's lost love. Some thought it was for all the souls of Wyndham who had gone before, but none of the versions were wrong. The truth, like most truths worth keeping, had softened with age into something larger than fact. One winter, Anna could no longer leave her bed. The world had shrunk to the view from her window, and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. A young man named Peter, the new librarian, began visiting her. She had once trained him when he was barely out of school, and now he was the one carrying on her work. When she realized she could no longer keep the lamp herself, she told him about it. The history, the names, the way it must always be lit before dark. She spoke slowly, with the quiet authority of someone passing on an inheritance. He listened without interruption, sensing that what she was giving him was not merely a task, but a piece of the town's soul. After that, Peter began lighting the lamp each evening. He would unlock the old house, step into the still air, and flick the switch. The glow that filled the room was gentle and steady, just as it had always been. He would linger a few minutes before leaving, letting the silence settle around him like an old blanket. Sometimes he felt the air shift faintly, as if acknowledging his presence. One evening, as the snow began to fall and the sky deepened to indigo, Anna lay in her bed, watching from her window. The light flickered on, soft against the frost, and for the first time in many years she felt something more than comfort, a quiet readiness. She closed her eyes and thought of all the evenings she had walked that street, of her youth and her laughter and the sound of church bells drifting through summer air. She thought of the faces that had come before her, Samuel sweeping his porch, Thomas tending the roses, the neighbors waving from across the road. In her mind they were all still there, unchanged, smiling in the same eternal twilight. When the neighbors found her the next morning, she was at peace, her hands folded over a small key resting on her chest, the key to the blue house. On her bedside table was a note written in her tidy hand, just 4 words long: "Keep the light burning." The years that followed were kind to Wyndham. The world beyond it grew faster, louder, stranger, but inside its borders time still knew how to pause. Peter grew older and passed the duty to another, and that person to another still. The lamp remained lit, through storms, through power cuts, through long winters and bright springs. The townsfolk said that as long as it shone, Wyndham would never disappear. Eventually, of course, even the town began to change. The railway was dismantled, the school closed, and the main road was rerouted far to the west. One by one, the shops shuttered and the houses emptied. Nature crept back in with patient grace. The elm trees grew wild, their roots lifting the pavements. their branches whispering through the air like pages turning in a forgotten book. Yet still, the lamp shone. When the last of the townspeople left, a caretaker from the county was assigned to check the property once a month. He found the lamp burning exactly as the record said it should. Curious, he tried once to switch it off, thinking there was no one left to notice. But that night, as he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw the light still shining in the window, steady as ever. He told no one of it, but after that he never touched it again. Years later, when Wyndham became little more than a name on old maps, travelers sometimes stumbled upon it by accident. They would find the remains of streets swallowed by grass, the shells of houses long forgotten, and at the corner of what had once been Maple Street, the blue house still standing. Its paint was faded, its roof sagging, yet the lamp in the window glowed with undimmed grace. Those who saw it said the air there felt different, hushed, gentle, as if the world itself was holding its breath. No one could say how the lamp stayed lit. There were no wires that anyone could find, no sign of maintenance and no sound but the soft hum of the wind through the broken eaves. Some believed it was the hand of God. Others said it was the strength of memory, and a few simply smiled and said that love, once kindled, finds a way to keep burning. One day, a young traveler stopped by and spent the night in what remained of Wyndham. She sat by the house and watched the lamp flicker through the long hours until dawn. In the quiet of that place, she felt something she could not name, a deep calm, as though the light were not shining for anyone, but from everyone who had ever lived, loved, or waited there. When morning came, she left a small flower beneath the window and went on her way, never speaking of it again. Years blurred into centuries, and still the lamp endured. The world around it shifted beyond recognition. Roads turned to dust, forests reclaimed the land, new cities rose and fell. But in that single window on a forgotten street, a golden light continued to pulse softly through time. Some say that if you walk there at dusk, when the mist rolls low and the air smells of old rain, you can still see faint figures through the glass. A teacher with chalk-stained hands, a restless student grown gentle, a librarian with silver hair, all watching the horizon with the quiet patience of eternity. And the lamp between them glows on, neither bright nor dim, but steady, the last warmth of humanity refusing to fade. And so the story of Wyndham ends, not with silence, but with light. A single constant light in a house that time forgot, burning across the endless evening, proof that the simplest acts of love can outlast even the world that made them.